Today we're going to confront a proposal by the BC Green Party. A new inheritance tax, a wealth tax on centime multimillionaires and billionaires, steeper income tax brackets, a land value tax, and more. Their message is simple. The ultra-wealthy have been evading their fair share of taxes. But from a rational and sound economics perspective, we'll show you why these proposals are not only economically illiterate, but counterproductive and philosophically misguided. We're going to talk Austrian economics, the Laffer curve. We'll bring in the Canadian data and examine why a steeply progressive income tax is essentially Marxist redistribution. So let's dive in. In October 2025, the BC Green Party tabled a new proposal for massive tax reforms. The first is a massive income tax increase on the high income earners in the province. This includes a bump in income over $1 million to be taxed an additional 30% on the provincial rate on top of what already exists. The second proposal is a new wealth tax equal to 5% of the net worth of anybody worth over $100 million. The third proposal is an inheritance or gift tax on any transfers worth more than $5 million, including real property and art. The fourth in their proposed reforms is a replacement of the current property tax system with a land value tax. The fifth proposal in their reforms is a review and likely curtailment of the current property tax deferral system for seniors. The sixth proposal is a corporate income tax increase and an additional 18% tax on excess earnings for companies making more than $1 billion. And the seventh proposal is a review of the resource royalty regime, claiming that multinational companies aren't paying their fair share. In their view, the ultra-wealthy and corporations have been getting away with not paying enough tax. And in their words, to quote, "It's time for equity, fairness, to invest in green jobs, healthcare centers, and social housing." Now, to understand why these proposals are deeply problematic, we have to turn to rational economics. First, we turn to F.A. Hayek's fundamental insight in the Constitution of Liberty. Hayek wrote, "The argument for liberty is an argument against all exclusive, privileged, monopolistic organization, against the use of coercion to prevent others from doing better." And another quote, "The system of private property is the most important guarantee of freedom, not only for those who own property, but scarcely less for those who do not." So from Hayek's perspective, property, including that built through voluntary exchange, is not an obstacle to justice, but a foundation for personal freedom. Second, we look to Ludwig von Mises, who said, "Nothing is more calculated to make a demagogue popular than a constantly reiterated demand for heavy taxes on the rich. Capital levies and high income taxes on larger incomes are extraordinarily popular with the masses." That is, when you create a system that focuses its confiscation efforts on the wealthy, you are basically playing with the political incentives that corrode freedom. The third person that we should look at quoting is Milton Friedman from the Chicago School, and he said plainly, "Whenever you try to do good with someone else's money, you are committed to using force. The only way you can take it away from them is by threat of force. You have a policeman, a tax collector, who comes to take it away from them." Therefore, taxation is just not a share issue. It's fundamentally about coercion. And the greater the confiscation from productive individuals, the greater the coercive intrusion into economic life. And the fourth person I'm going to indirectly quote here is Thomas Sowell, who emphasized that excessive redistribution ignores incentives, knowledge problems, capital formulation, and the fact that wealth is not a fixed pie. Excessive progressive taxation tends towards outcomes that resemble Marxist redistribution, where the state becomes the arbiter of who gets what. In short, and from a philosophical standpoint, steep wealth taxes, inheritance and wealth transfer between generations, and levies placed thereon, and punitive tax brackets all lie on the slippery slope towards collectivism. The Green Party's implication of what they considered to be the fair share implies a moral judgment on who gets to keep the fruits of their labor. But sound and rational economics reminds us what matters is voluntary exchange, property, incentives, and limits to state power. So now let's bring facts into this debate. The Green Party claims that the ultra-wealthy and corporations are not paying their fair share. But what does the data say? According to a 2024 Fraser Institute bulletin, the top 20% of income-earning families in Canada pay over 62% of the overall personal taxes paid in Canada. In the US, according to data, the top 1% income earners paid almost 46% of the total personal income taxes paid in the States. So the claim that the ultra-wealthy aren't paying their fair share doesn't reflect the structural realities. High-income earners are already making major contributions to the total taxes paid. And yet the Green Party in British Columbia is still pushing for higher taxes. Let's be honest, the Greens are just looking to fund their programs, and to do that, they're looking to collect inheritance taxes, higher tax brackets on income, wealth transfer tax, and other levies and taxes. But just because you implement higher tax rates doesn't mean that you're collecting more. Now, economics teaches another critical factor here, and that is the Laffer curve. Now, this economic theory proved that there is a certain point where raising taxes simply doesn't produce additional revenue. And the reason is because higher tax rates reduces the incentive to work and be productive. From the Hoover's Institution analysis, pushing tax rates above X doesn't get you revenue beyond X. And this is because the tax base shrinks to behavioral responses. In Canada, the tax to GDP ratio, according to the OECD, is already relatively high at almost 35%. And the further you push up rates, you start risking changes in behavior. People start voting with their boots, and they start leaving jurisdictions where they feel that they're being treated unfairly. So you have talent that leaves a jurisdiction, you have money that leaves a jurisdiction, and reporting avoidance increases. The net effect? Less revenue and slower growth. For British Columbia, a province grappling with affordability issues, competition issues, and investment that is already leaving the province, this is a real issue. In other words, increasing the tax on the wealthy may feel or seem fair politically, but the economic reality is that it could seriously undermine the economy of the province. That means falling GDP, loss of innovation, and loss of jobs. So let's be very clear. A system which imposes significantly higher tax on certain classes is a redistributive system. It treats wealth as something that should be confiscated, handed back out, rather than creating the incentives that help create wealth in the first place. And in that sense, it shares the logic of Marxism. Wealth is redistributed by force. The state becomes the arbiter of who keeps what, and economic freedom drops. And of course, the corollary of dropping economic freedom is also personal freedom. Hayek warned us many years ago. I am certain that nothing has been done more to destroy the juridical safeguards of individual freedom as the striving after this mirage of social justice. Friedman, on the other hand, said, "The essential notion of a socialist state is fundamentally force." So when the Greens claim to want to collect more tax from the ultra-wealthy and so that they could pay their fair share, the first question that we have to ask is, well, who determines what is that fair share? The second question we need to ask is what happens when the government gets rid of the incentives to create wealth? If you punish success, you discourage success. And if you tax savings, you discourage the formation of capital, an essential input for jobs and productivity. Furthermore, a higher inheritance levy or gift tax penalizes intergenerational wealth transfer, not just on oligarchs, but on regular families too. A land value tax may sound efficient, but if used as a lever to discourage ownership and speculation, it's going to drive away property redevelopment and investment. From an Austrian economics perspective, the goal is not to punish the creation of wealth, but to protect property, freedom, incentives, and the spontaneous market order. This new proposal by the Green Party simply turns everything on its head. So let's dive a little bit deeper into British Columbia and the problems we're facing. BC is a resource-rich economy with mining, forestry, and resources. And those resources depend on investment and global capital flow. In BC, we have a tech sector that competes globally for talent and capital. And we have a housing market that is already stretching the wallets of the middle class. If the province introduces a one-time wealth tax on people with more than $100 million net worth, they will simply shift their capital to another jurisdiction. If the Green Party proposal goes through, this higher income tax bracket on north of $350,000 income will disincentivize talent from coming to British Columbia, where they can make the same money elsewhere or even less and still net more or the same. The introduction of an inheritance tax means that families and businesses will not have the incentive to save as much. A land value tax may hinder renovation or it may discourage development altogether. An excess profit tax on corporations will lead those corporations to take their business and their head offices and all the jobs with it to another jurisdiction. And so what are the effects of implementing these proposals? Certainly we're going to see slower growth, reduced investment, the flight of capital to other jurisdictions, fewer jobs being created, fewer opportunities being created, and eventually less revenue to spend on job creation in the green sector and social housing. In short, you kill the goose that lays the golden egg. Instead, if you focus on a lower tax, growth-oriented environment that keeps BC competitive in the global marketplace, you generate a larger pie from which to cut from. And as Thomas Sowell reminded us, it's not about cutting the pie differently, it's about making a bigger pie. So let's conclude with the following truths. The high income earners and wealthy in Canada already pay a large share of the tax revenue. Austrian economics teaches us that coercive redistribution leads to less freedom and growth. The Laffer curve demonstrates that just because you have a higher tax rate doesn't necessarily equal higher tax revenue. Any political agenda that targets success risks undermining the foundations of prosperity. Rather than myopically focus on increased and more punitive taxation, a better path may be to reduce tax rates altogether for all, broaden the tax base, incentivize savings and entrepreneurship and investment, protect property rights, and keep BC competitive on a global market. Let the growth pay for additional services. And if you believe in individual liberty, freedom, and prosperity, you're going to want to talk to your political counterparts, either your MLAs or MPs or both. We shouldn't not talk about this, because I'm sure all of us have great ideas on how Canada can increase freedom and prosperity. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit like, subscribe, and that notification bell for upcoming videos. Remember that the future belongs to those who prepare.